Ralston, and I'm the co-founder of NextTribe, and I'm so excited to be here tonight with Vanessa O'Brien, who is the certified badass. I mean, a lot of people call themselves badasses, but she's got all the documents. She's got like the Explorers Grand Slam, the world record holder, a woman doing it the fastest of anyone. She's climbed Everest, K2, North Pole, South Pole, everything. She's done it. And what I find so encouraging and making me feel like anything's possible is that she started all this at age 45, which means that there's a lot of things we still can do, no matter what age we're at. So welcome, Vanessa. I'm so glad you're here.
It's a pleasure. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
And as you can see, everyone behind me is the title of her book, The Greatest Heights is the name of her book. Oops, did it disappear?
It disappeared.
The Greatest Heights, and the Facing Danger, Finding Humility, and Climbing a Mountain of Truth. And I have to say, I have just been speeding through this and dog-earing pages, and I have to admit that I am an Everest junkie. So I'm an adventure, well, I mean, I would say an armchair Everest junkie as opposed to the real Everest junkie who's here with us. Anyway, I like to read about things. I've been up into the Khumbu region in the Himalayas, and my husband's done all kinds of stuff, the Khumbu icefall, all this stuff. So I'm just coming at it from that. I'm just fascinated by what you've done, Vanessa, and I'm just thrilled that you can come to talk to us about it.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, the book, it's been a wonderful process. It was supposed to be launched last year. It was delayed because of COVID-19, but that's not a bad thing because, you know, it's been a difficult year for everyone, and it's better really now to be able to talk about it. And not that we can socialize in person, but that's coming hopefully soon.
So at some point we're going to have a conversation. We're going to meet in person, and we're going to try to have, you know, that kind of thing. But
yeah, for book launches and stuff like that, that would be great.
So I have to start with the classic question, and I've got all kinds of questions for you, but I'll start with the classic one. Why do you climb mountains?
Why do you climb mountains?
As George Mallory was asked and famously
yes. Can I say because it's there? That would be great. I would love to be able to end with that, and nobody lets me get away with it, but he got away with it, you know, that bugger. You know, when I really wanted to attempt Everest in the beginning, there was a catalyst, and my catalyst was the economic recession of 2008 and 2009. So I was out of work, or about to be out of work, and I was looking for a goal, something to sink my teeth into. And I was not a climber at all. And I was looking at a list of things to do. I had five criteria for those that haven't read the book. And as a left-brain person, they were pretty basic things and measurable things. So things like I wanted it to have a goal, something that I could measure success, something that would take 2 to 3 years because it was a recession, something that was not financial for the obvious reasons. It was a subprime mortgage crisis happening, and you know, it went along those lines. And suddenly, you know, I was thinking about things like what do you care? You know, what do I care about? What's important? And you know, there would be things like, well, I'd like to get rid of those mosquitoes. Malaria is, you know, important, and you know, mosquitoes are annoying. You know, nobody really likes those, right? And I'm sure they're part of the food chain and bugs and all of that. But you know, maybe we could do without those. But it was bigger than me, and I don't know, like for 2 to 3 years, part of that criteria where I could measure my return of time and talent, right? Not that I had much treasure in those days. So, you know, like it would just fail on one of those criteria. And then I thought, okay, well, I love skincare. What if I could get one of those exotic fruits from Asia, you know, and get those antioxidants out, you know, I could do something really cool with that. But how do I know how to, you know, make the shelf life work and distribute it? It was bigger than me, right? So, you know, 2 to 3 years, like it failed. And I was just having this existential crisis. And I should mention I was in Hong Kong, so there was that existential crisis about a new place, no language, you know, not working for the first time in a long time. And suddenly somebody said Everest. And it was like the suggestion out of the blue that ricocheted and bounced off the floor and kind of, Everest, 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 Everest. And of course there's DVDs that now also do that. And I thought, wow, where is it? I vaguely remember, yes, there was a guy or two guys, 1953, highest, world first, all this stuff. But well, it had happened then. It was also happening now or then. And I thought, you know what? I wonder if I could. No, I couldn't. But the one thing that differentiated me, probably from many people, is that I didn't see climbing as an absolute thing I couldn't do. I saw it as a skill, and a skill could be learned and therefore taught. And I think that's probably what made me different than other people.
Ah, and it also sounds like I know you have an MBA and you're an executive, so it sounds like you brought your executive MBA brain to this decision making.
Yes, and that would be interesting in the beginning, and it would absolutely hurt me at that next stage, because I would go and, learn how to do that in a very, say corporate way, and say, okay, this isn't too bad. Where should I take these new skills if the goal is Everest? Well, the way they sold Everest was base camp, camp 2, or summit. So a bit like Goldilocks and the Three Bears.
So this is your first climb. I mean, the first
climb after having learned how to do this. And I thought, well, I'm not experienced enough for the summit. However, I had been higher than base camp. So I pitched for the middle, missing the fact that the most dangerous place was right out of base camp, right? So it's sometimes what you don't know is what you don't know.
And that's called the Khumbu Icefall.
That's right, the Khumbu Icefall, and it's no place for a beginner, but I didn't know this lingo. I didn't know what that meant. I only knew from a height perspective that I had been higher than Everest Base Camp, and I had wanted to go higher and get on the ice and get on the snow and use these climbing skills, because everything up to Everest Base Camp is just hiking.
So can I just ask, what in your background prepared you for this? Because I mean, I was telling somebody about you and they're like, well, was she just a fitness fanatic before this? Was she in just great shape? Is that why she, and I'm like, I didn't sound, I mean, I think it sounds like you've always been in good shape, but you weren't a crazy, were you?
Oh, no, I used fitness to mitigate weight gain in a corporate life.
Right.
So if I wanted to go and say I had to, entertain or, had to go out to eat or drink, if I didn't say work out for an hour, I could eat or drink what I wanted if I exercised for an hour.
Right, right. Yes.
That was parity.
Right.
If those two weren't equal, then weight gain came up.
Yeah.
So I was not a fitness fanatic, but I knew my body.
Right.
And I knew how I could keep that in check if I wanted my clothes to fit, and if I, wanted to stay a size 12, which is what I am. Right. Like a US 12.
But what about just the, what in your background? I mean, were you an outdoors woman, or I mean, were you seeking adventure usually? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out your mind. What was your mindset that prepared you in ways for what you did?
So my I had very young parents who had children at say 18, which, I'm not sure by today's standard if that's the norm or not the norm really, but it was young. Mm-hmm. So I say that in contrast to my husband, who was born to 40-year-olds.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So we are very different, even in what we like to do. Because born to 40-year-olds, he was shipped off to boarding school at the age of 7. They had no tolerance for him whatsoever. And cried, of course, a 7-year-old would cry. He saw his parents twice a year. Whereas kids having kids is a collective unit and they all play together.
Yeah.
The downside to that is, you know, a maturity level. So I wouldn't say my parents were hugely mature. You know, you end up sort of being the parent to young parents sometimes, if that makes sense. So I probably had to be more responsible early. And of course, I weave personal stories, and I call them reveals. And the decision whether to reveal something or not was based on whether it could help somebody else. And obviously that's a judgment call.
Mm-hmm.
The reveals for me are unpleasant. So it's not fun to reveal. This isn't like, hey, you know, something really fun that you're revealing there. It's unpleasant. But the reason I would reveal it is because I thought, and you know, this wasn't just me, it was with the publisher and others, that it could help somebody else. So these are things like body issues. I had very large breasts. You know, I would go on to have 2 breast reductions. That means that I could never buy like the same size clothes for the tops and bottoms. You know, boys would pick on you and pull your bra straps, and, you know, and it leaves scars. And, you know, the first time you're intimate with somebody, you know, that goes on. And so there's issues around stuff like that. And I wanted to be honest about that and help people through that if they struggle with that. Abandonment issues. So I had a brother that died quite young. He was 1 year younger in an accident, a boating accident. And my parents left me in the house around probably 15, 16. So through high school, I lived by myself, and basically they stopped by and, well, not they, my father would stop by and pick up the bills for the house. And, you know, I did work part-time, but he'd probably drop off some cash too. So if people did experience any of those issues, I wanted to reveal them to give them some tools or ways to look at it, you know, with a different perspective.
Did that help build that toughness you needed, do you think? I mean, the way you grew up to build the toughness you needed to get through.
So, you know, it's hard. You know, I think everybody that has an experience always thinks it's normal, right? I think it's normal because that's my experience. So I don't think it's unusual. I only see it's unusual when I compare and say, oh, you didn't do that, right? Only by comparison do we see it's different and not normal, right? So, but looking back and comparing, I can see, you know, that there are differences, and, you know, perhaps that early responsibility probably made me a little bit more serious. You know, it certainly, you know, put some things onto me that other people didn't have to deal with at that age. However, I will say, when there's forks in the road, there's interesting things that happen, because I had no supervision. So there was plenty of opportunity for me to take a fork in the road that was a bad path.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
You know, I could turn around and say, hey, drugs and alcohol, you know, hey, you know, teenage pregnancy, hey, you know, like all these things sound fun, but, you know, the reality is, how much fun is it?
Right.
For how long? When you think, okay, how long is a life when you multiply that out? Right?
Yes.
And is it fun for a day? Is it fun for a week? Is it fun for a month, a year, 5 years? You know, and that's the thing. So I think in my left brain way, I was always sort of multiplying this thing out, like fun for how long?
Right.
So, you know, I did have the keg parties, and I had like a bunch of drunk people in the house, but almost like an Animal House, it was like, okay, I had a set of friends that would also throw the drunk people out, which was great.
Yeah, need those. You have a quote that I just love. I underlined it and I took note. It's when you were talking to your husband about going to Everest, you said, it's easy to explain why I shouldn't go and impossible to explain why I should. And I love that quote because it's true in life. I mean, it's easier to just say, you're basically saying it's easier just to stay in your comfort zone and not risk anything and not And so tell me about that thinking in your life. Have you always pushed yourself out of your comfort zone in your career, in your life, do you think?
Yeah, I probably have. And, you know, the one thing in business that where I was in the comfort zone was in business, I was always dealing with risk. And that was good. You know, we were dealing with risk because, you know, business involves risk.
Right.
And so you could go to work every day and trade in that, right? And get paid for that, which was fine.
Right.
But in life, it's not the same. You don't want to take personal risks the way you would necessarily in that same way. I'm not going to close my eyes and cross the street, right? So there's different forms of risk. There's risk where it's you know, it's an educated, calculated, knowledgeable risk versus, you know, kind of blind luck, right? And so, you know, even in the decision with Everest, when I thought about it as a skill that could be learned and therefore taught, my first impression was, would I like it and be any good at it? Those are both very interesting prongs of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like it says, okay, generally if you like something that helps you be good at it, you're probably not going to be really good at something you don't like.
Right.
You can't force yourself to really be, you know, enjoy something or be good at something. But anyway, you know, what I found is, okay, and I am not the best climber, by the way, by far.
Well, then what are you? I mean, if you're not the best climber, then how did you do the records?
Well, you know, I think what gives me an edge, when I say I'm not the best climber, I mean I have aspects that, say, a technical climber don't have, if that makes sense. Like some of the softer skills, the decision making, the leadership, the teamwork. You know, they might be great technically, but they're never going to have those softer things.
Right.
They won't have the diplomacy to be able to go into a country and negotiate things. You know, so as a whole, as a stacked bar chart, you know, I have things overall that make me greater than the sum of my parts as a great climber, but not just one thing. Some people say, okay, I'm just this one thing, but it's not just that.
Well, and we talked about it when we were chatting the other day, that what you started later, but what your age brought to your success. So, I mean, it sounds like some of the things you're talking about, your age and wisdom from your, you know, life experience helped you a lot. Would you agree?
I totally agree. Some of the feedback that I've received from the book has really come from people who are a little bit older and were looking to make changes and they didn't know how.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it doesn't have to be this book, but it's books that just tell stories about people who did it in a different way. Right. and show sometimes, you know, how they did it and what the outcomes are. Right. The most important thing, I think, is whenever you pivot, that when you take that step forward, that people always remember that you can take a step back. Wow. You know, the worst thing that people think is, oh no, if I make this move, I'm out. Like I can't make another move. It's like, no, of course, when you make that move, just think of a chessboard, you know, you make a move forward, you can always go back.
Well, and that's it's interesting, because I was going to ask, one thing I loved about the book is that it weaves so much of you know, art, philosophy and leadership skills and all these and thoughtful ideas about how to navigate life into your stories. And would that be the most important thing probably that you've learned? It's just that just more like it's more of a flow and the way you build your life.
Yeah, well, so if I had had a choice, I wouldn't have put it in mountaineering. Let's say that. Because I think it's a terrible place to hide the book, because
what you mean, the mountaineering? Oh, the book being,
yeah, as a section.
I see what you're saying. Yes, yes.
Yeah, because
What would you rather it be? Would it be in not self-help?
Yeah, it could have been, I don't know if memoir is an actual category in a bookstore or not, or if people even go to bookstores, or if there are any bookstores anymore. I know Barnes and Noble, independent bookstores, exist, but I think the mountaineering is a way to tell a story, but the purpose of the story is about change.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why that initial dedication, that inscription is really to all those with the courage to embrace change.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And that's just the biggest thing, isn't it? The hardest thing for many of us at this age.
It's so hard to change, but I'll tell you, my husband was so furious, and he was like, "You did not dedicate to me." And I'm like, "No, it's not you. You are not on that front page, my friend."
Oh my gosh, but wait, I have to stop you there, because your husband sounds like a saint. Did people say that?
Yeah, they love his character, but he's got his quirks where he's not such a saint. But I will,
I mean,
but,
he kind of just accommodates and rolls along, and I'm like, oh my God,
he's very funny. But like that opening page, But I was like, no, this is not about you. To all those with the courage to embrace change. Sorry, honey, you just have a seat there. It's not to me, like crocodile tears, whatever. But it's fine, But for people to be brave enough to get outside of their comfort zone and to do something different requires, almost like I want to do the sound effects of applause.
Oh.
Because it's so hard. People stay in terrible relationships. They stay in crappy jobs. They stay in places they don't want to live anymore, all because they don't understand that even within themselves, they don't need anybody else. They have the strength within themselves to make that decision.
Wow. And you definitely showed that you had the strength to do it, probably more than you ever thought you could, I would imagine. One thing that you said that you can always, go back, but in mountaineering, that's not always the case, right? I mean, what I'm saying is there's some life or death, like you could decide, okay, we're going to go for the summit, and then you can't go back. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, so in a mountain, no, first of all, nobody ever has the same experience, because one important thing about the difference between, let's say, an office and a mountain is when we're hired by anyone, we're hired for more or less to be in control and to be in charge. Jane, we want you to do this, and you're in charge and you do this.
Right.
But when you're with Mother Nature, you have to just strip your ego, because she's in charge.
Ah, yes.
And it won't be on your timetable. Things are not going to happen when you want them to happen. Weather will happen when she wants them to happen. Avalanches, storms, everything's going to go at her schedule, not yours. And so time and time again, your ego is just stripped. And you are just bare, naked, and just trembling against Mother Nature. So it's such a powerful force that it's humbling against, when you are, say, in another, when you're in control, in whatever,
right.
So powerful, in nature, you are not. And so it's a very, very different environment, and one that is, right away you have to, have a different mindset. And I had to learn, because I came first thinking I'm in control, right? Ate the humble pie, had to let go of the ego, all of that. And it was terrible. But once I understood, that was going to help me succeed more.
Has that whole, because we all, hear about, letting go, and has that fundamentally changed you ever since? I mean, how does that change how you go about your daily life now? That whole idea you're just explaining is so powerful.
Yeah, well, I think it made me a nicer person, for sure. that someone actually wrote about it, Benjamin Hardy, in one of his personality books. And I think he says something to the effect of, maybe corporate Vanessa, would have barreled in and said something like, okay, talking about something right to the point. And she probably would never have asked about you and your day, because you and your day weren't really important.
Mm.
It was whatever was important and on the table right there and then. And, it made me more aware, more open and accepting.
Yes.
So I think that's very true. It made me more patient. I was not a patient person. I had to become a patient person.
I was going to say, after, how many attempts at K2, I mean,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, it's like, oh my God. Every time I was reading it, I was like, oh, John, I can't
know,
it's
so
around. Damn it, you got so far. And that's a theme through all of your attempts, is that whole idea about going ahead, turning back, going ahead. And some people wanting to go ahead and some people wanting to go back. And that just seems like those are some real, that's decision making, like,
Yes.
the decisions have to be made, and they are made with life or death consequences. So, and I like how you talked about too, that how, I think you were saying how it's become more feminine. Some of the leaders had a more feminine type of leadership where they kind of ask the questions. Is that, did I get that right?
Yeah, there's still only maybe 25%, say of female leadership in this, genre of exploration, but they do think differently. Their communication, they're stronger on communication, they're stronger on collaboration. Their approaches is different. The examples that I use in the book is one where the first time I encounter a female guide, which is on Mount Rainier in Washington State, she talks about a team that is struggling for the summit of Mount Rainier, and we get to the camp before the summit, and she finds that we are not moving fast enough to go to the summit. Mm. And so she puts forward to the team a decision and asks the team collectively, would we all like to go a little bit further the next day, knowing we won't make the summit, or would some of us like to opt out and see others go to the summit? Wow. And thereby choose, we would have to self-select, right, and be honest who we are. And I just know that if it were a male guide, they would have said, John, Bob, and Sue, pack up for tomorrow. The rest of you, you're staying behind and wait for us to come down. That there would have not been that, collective group decision making.
Right. Did it come to this? Do you think it would have come to the same? I mean, or did it come to the same conclusion? Like, did the ones who really needed to stay behind, did they recognize that in themselves? And
well, so it doesn't always, because people will bluff, in other words, they'll say, and this is why you don't want to be in big teams always, because you're always stuck with the weakest link.
Wow, right.
Remember, you're not hiring people, it's not like there's really a filter. People are just paying money to go, in many cases. So people will bluff and say, no, I'm going to go, but they'll just slow you down.
Right.
And if you only have, say, 2 guides, you've got a tail, and you've got this is getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Right. And then,
yeah. And so at the end of the day, how are you going to control this? Well, the only way you can control it is this guy's got to slow down, because this guy can't speed up. Mm. So that's where you get in trouble.
And I want to say to all of you too, I didn't say this at the beginning, but if you have questions for Vanessa, you can type them in the chat, and then I'm going to open it up, and you can talk to her directly about your own either your own mountaineering efforts or your dreams of Everest, or, you know, if you're like me, just like to read about it. And not just Everest, of course. If I keep saying Everest, but it's more than that. But I do, one thing I have to say about your Everest experience, I could not believe that you didn't have any water on the day you summited. Isn't that like the biggest no-no, is to not have water?
You know, it is. But I will tell you, even now, I'm watching the summits of Everest will happen in the next couple of days, 1, 2, 3 days from now. There's been 17 confirmed cases of COVID-19 that have been taken from base camp down to the local hospitals, and there are, say, 1,000 people at base camp. So that's just the known cases. We know how much it spreads, right? So respiratory is one of the most communicable diseases.
Right.
And of course, we've always gone into our elbow. We always hand sanitize. You know, I've always worn the masks because the masks do two things. It stops all the yak dust coming in, and it humidifies or warms the cold, dry air. The higher you go, it's a little colder.
Oh, so you were well practiced at wearing masks before.
Well practiced, plus Hong Kong. Remember Hong Kong? They
right.
Anyway, that was, you know, they had bird flu or whatever. Yeah, I think it was bird something. But yeah, so I had those things in base camp. But now I look at what's happening there, and the reason when my water bottles froze, even my big thermos, this will never freeze, and stuffed in, you know, the most down. When I have a choice between drinking from somebody else, knowing everybody's sick, or staying dehydrated, knowing what that feels like, I'll take dehydration.
I just couldn't, I mean, I was worried for you.
Yeah, and look, it's no fun. You know, you will have mild hallucinations and stuff when you're dehydrated, but it's that, or I will come down and I will be sick. I will be sick drinking from somebody else, and then I'll be on antibiotics, and it'll take me 10 days to like kill it.
Right.
Neither are pleasant, but one is definitely a short term.
Right.
It's not fun to be thirsty and to be dehydrated and to be slightly loopy, but I knew what it felt like to be dehydrated.
So okay.
And nobody drinks enough water. You know, I was just looking at a 75-day challenge, and the first thing of that challenge was, you have to drink a gallon of water a day, and I was like, a gallon? You know, here I'm worried about my, you know,
water, because when you're talking about it, I'm like,
yeah. I mean, we just don't drink enough water.
Yeah.
And people even say like skincare, they're like, oh, your skin looks great. Well, first of all, I just want to tell you, I'm cheating. I have a huge light here.
Oh, I have one too.
Yeah.
Ring light.
This, I'm telling you, you want to look good, just buy one of these, because
that's like a more industrial version than mine.
Seriously, and actually a friend told me about this. I didn't even know about this, but this makes you look, hello. You know, nobody looks bad under this light. Nobody, okay? You can take any face and look like a supermodel, but also water, that you're feeding your skin from the inside out.
So let's talk about the other thing I kept thinking. Well, I kept thinking a lot of things, but one of them was, oh my God, how much did all this cost? You don't have to tell me how much it all costs. You don't have to go like that. But you mentioned that you're like depleting your saving, things like, I want to ask if it was worth it, or I don't know how to ask about the money thing, because I just got so worried about it. How did you finance that, and how did you feel comfortable with that kind of outlay?
You know, so it is, at one point I lived on a mountain for a year. Let's think of it that way, because to do the Explorers Grand Slam in 11 months or 7 summits in 295 days, I'm on a mountain for a year. I'm living in a tent for a year.
Wow.
It is completely unnatural to sleep in a tent on the floor in a sleeping bag in the cold without any heat for a year. It's not nice. It's, you know, why would you do that? Right? When there are choices. I see somebody looks like they have a really comfortable couch. It's Kim.
Yeah.
So yeah, why would you do that? You just don't want to do that. But I'll tell you, when you are doing that, you realize that it takes very little to survive and make you happy. Very little. You know, with a Kindle and to read and an iPad with a couple of movies, very little entertainment, a deck of cards, you know, and all the nature in the world to soak up and photograph. You can be quite happy with very little. And less clothes is more in this case because you're doing less laundry. So, so you really just want that thing close to you that you're washing and the outer layers on top that you don't have to wash so often. And that's by hand, doesn't dry so well in the cold. So really, you know, those basic things. And I'll tell you what drives you crazy when you come home, because when you are in the mountains and really on the mountains, you're in such a state of serious high alert. Your senses are on overload. And sometimes you might remember where I got so stressed, hair was falling out.
Yeah.
And that's because I'm listening, you know, you're constantly listening for something to go wrong, you know, for an avalanche to take out a tent or, you know, something like that. But then you come home and it's like, wow, you're in the supermarket. And it's like, really just the biggest decision you have to make today is what kind of brand of, you know, oatmeal you're going to buy today, you know, and there's like a whole row of choices and it's like, wow, okay, you know, and you just have to go through all that survival, and then you can completely understand what people with PTSD in a serious way have to deal with, right, when they come back from war. And I'm not in war, but I'm just in the elements.
Yeah, you had some pretty stressful, as you say, some pretty stressful situations.
Yes, but it's not a hard step to figure out like what that would be like, right? You know, if they're on high alert the whole time, like looking at something, right? So it is an interesting thing. But back to the question of, you know, the trade-offs, is it worth it? One thing is when I am a year living in a tent, I'm not spending money. Savings. So people don't look at that either. So, you know, on the one column is like, cha-ching, you know, there is no money being spent, and that's a beautiful thing. But there was money being spent to spend a year doing that. So there's money that's gone out. So, you know, net, you know, it's always hard to look back and say, do you regret something? You know, I definitely learned and developed in a different way through these experiences. Not even always through the mountain, but through the people that I was with, through the stories that developed through it, through the experiences, really.
Yeah.
You know, it in a way, it was one of probably the best corporate training programs one could ever go through, because you're put in the farthest place with a group of people that you can't escape, that you have to make work, and the only way out is up, right? And
that's a good lesson for teamwork for sure. And you had one really bad team member, really bad. But anyway, that's I'm sure that's kind of rare that to be, because everybody else seemed like they were pulling for each other.
Yeah, you know, there was sort of an old joke that's always said, you know, there's always going to be, I'll say a bad asshole, or sorry, a bad apple, a bad apple on the team, and they did actually say it the other way that I almost said, and if you don't know who that bad apple is, ...
Oh.
Right? It's probably you, right? So, you know, hopefully you can identify somebody else and not have it not be you, right? That would be terrible. But yeah, you know, and also remember that usually, I don't think I've ever been somewhere where there's not another team. So there's usually, well, you know, maybe the North Pole, because we always go in different directions. But there's at least probably one other team.
Yeah.
And you probably don't socialize per se because of the communicable diseases, but you're aware of the presence of somebody else.
So a couple more things. One is, you know, on some of those days when, like you were talking about in the South Pole, I think it was, that your feet were just, you had blisters and you had problems with your toes and possible frost. What is it? What goes through your head to keep you going? What is your soundtrack? What is it that keeps you going?
So if it's, I do like to play music, climbing or skiing, you know, not downhill skiing. This is kind of cross country. I think music is a motivator. And this is sort of before podcasts. I know podcasts became really popular in the last like year or two, but I really like music. I think it's fantastic. I think for safety reasons, you know, of course, put it on low because, you know, you don't want to, you know, head over a snow bridge and pop down or, you know, have something go wrong. That would not be fun. But I think if you put it on low, because you know what these things are when you're starting to hear them, but sometimes just hearing the little faint something that you can relate to can give you that powerful oomph, you know, just when you need it. And sometimes it could be a lyric, or sometimes it can be just a beat, you know, and it can be really powerful at the right time.
And I think,
yeah.
I think he sang 100 Bottles of Beer on the Wall in several chapters. Like getting to the top.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from. And that was not with something in my ear. I didn't have any music at the time. But what I was trying to do in that instance was to distract myself. And because at the time I had really negative thoughts coming in my head. And they were saying, you know, you're really miserable, everything's going wrong, you've been higher than you've been before, you should cut your losses and turn around, what's wrong with you, you're cold, you're tired, you're hungry, and just all these negative thoughts kept coming in, and I was like, oh, you know, and my normal trick, which is put it on a raft, float it away, you know, wasn't working. These were just really super negative thoughts. And I was like, what am I going to do? I got to get rid of them. And just as I was thinking, I got to get rid of them, just that 99 Bottles of Beer song came. And I swear I haven't heard it since I was like 12 or 13 or 14 or something. But it was as if the heavens like just sent it down and programmed it. And it is such a long song. I have to say, if you really go 99 through a chorus and then 98, and you're passing those around, taking one down, I mean,
get to the top of Denali, you know.
So, and what's beautiful about that, you know, I was thinking about this later, if you do something like row, row, row your boat, right? The problem with that is it's like a circular reference, and you'll get lost and you'll get bored. And if you get lost and you get bored, you will go back to the negative thoughts.
Yeah. So that's a good. So you have to count backwards. So you're keeping those negative thoughts in.
Yeah, and it's okay. You can't actually count. You can count 1 to 1,000, 1,000 to 1. You know, counting actually does work, or 1,000 if you want to make it longer. That does work as well. You can't really sing a song because you'll forget the words, believe it or not.
Right.
It has to be something really super silly and stupid but long. You could try to problem solve or you know, think of something in the past or something like that, but all these things are too short. You know, if I was trying to think of a problem like a fight I had with somebody or how I was going to figure it out, that they're all just too short.
Yeah. So I wanted to know, I mean, you had a lot of harrowing experiences and so forth, but when was the time you were most afraid? Was there one time?
So fear is an interesting topic. And I think the way I like to say it is, once you experience real fear, you no longer look at fear the same way. And the best way for me to say this to an audience without a climbing tale is to imagine you're in a car and all of a sudden somebody pulls out in front of you and you slam the brakes. In that moment, you're having that fight or flight scenario and everything's going through your veins, and you've seen that whole thing about to happen. You felt it. In other words, fear is something you feel, it's physical, it's mental, you've experienced the whole thing, you cannot take it back. Whether you hit the brakes and not crash, or you hit the brakes and crash and wake up in a hospital, you've felt that whole sensation. So that's fear. Fear is not something that you can't say I'm afraid of spiders. Does that make sense? Those are two different things.
Yeah. The real fear is a physical.
So fear to me now, having really experienced it, is something that happens to you at the moment you think it's curtains, and it's something, and it's really going, like you're really in trouble and you're going to die, or something is going to happen that's really bad. And the fact that you can still talk about it means that it didn't happen, but you really went through that process.
Right.
And it's horrible, right? Nobody should go through that process. But that's the best analogy I could come up with.
So when was a time that you felt that? I mean, there might have been many times, but which one stands out?
Running out of oxygen, when I thought I was running out of oxygen and took a breath and it wasn't there. So, cupping my mouth and taking that breath and having it not be there, the brain said, it's not there, you're out. So the whole chemical process goes through, and I think that's it, I'm out. I cannot live. And so I can't take that back. The body goes through and processes it. And I just happen to look up and think that, oh God, that's it, and then I breathe and suddenly.
Yes, you'll read about this, those who read the book, but it was more of the way the oxygen line was.
Yeah, the tube was twisted, but had I not bothered to take that second breath, but I think that's involuntary. That would have been it, right? Over. And then I think I was rappelling once and thought I was going to run out of rope. And by the way, not to freak people out, but you do release some urine when you're afraid as well. So that's not a fun that's not a fun byproduct of fear. But so and this is when I'm horrified, because I think I'm going to run out of rope, but I'm more horrified because I think I'm going to pee on the guide as well. So that's a double horrified scenario, because he's underneath me. So I don't know what was more frightening, the fact that I'm going to die and run out of rope, or the fact that the poor guy underneath is going to get drenched. But actually, if I didn't live, then I wouldn't have to really put up with that. So that would be okay.
And wait, I'm going to put this here. You can't see it.
They should fix that. If you have a nice background, a visual background, they should at least allow the
thing here. That looks pretty scary. That's on K2, right? Or no?
No, that's Karsten's Pyramid. That's Indonesia.
Okay, yeah.
That's called a Tyrolean Traverse. That's between an open area.
Yeah.
So let's call it two mountains, or a break in a mountain. And when you try to get across on a rope, nowadays I think they actually try to walk it with another pair of ropes.
Oh my God!
I don't know which you think is worse, whether you try to, go hand fist.
That looks pretty scary to me. So,
yeah.
So, I think you said that you hope that anybody going through change would get something out of this. So what is it that you would say to people, because people listening who are thinking about change, or who've been through a lot of change in the past year, because we all have, what is it you can tell us to help us at this point?
Well, so let me share some of the feedback, because I find this really interesting, and these are not climbers. One says, I've already found so many references to challenges that remind me of my own. It was definitely the right book at the right time. I'm not even a climber. It's great to hear another perspective on risk taking. So that was quite good, because again, a comparison, somebody's comparing what they're looking at doing or trying to do. This one says, your line about losing a career is like losing a family really resonated. I changed my career at 42 and was surprised at how socially lost it made me feel. I really love the book.
Good, good.
So somebody looking or who had changed a career and, you know, really, it must have made them feel, you know, isolated at some point. This one says, you mentioned you are 5'4" and started climbing in your 40s after leaving corporate. That's so encouraging. I look forward to doing something new myself. Thanks for sharing your story.
Great. Yeah.
You know, your reflections on your own life invites the reader, myself included, to want to spill my guts back to you about how imperfect I am. Uh-oh. I don't know if that's good or bad.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
I'm not Dr. Phil, that's for sure. And the last one here says, the humor, the tragedies, the excitement, this is an insanely inspiring read. So that's very sweet. I actually love getting feedback because it tells me what people get out of it and, you know, what's touching them.
You know, we didn't talk about the humor, but there is a lot of humor in this. I mean, I guess it's kind of, in a way, that dark humor, like when you're facing, you know, people talk about doctors and stuff having dark humor, but if you're facing like life and death, you know, sometimes the only way to cope with that is to make jokes about what you're facing, right?
It is, and you know, it's, I can't really help it because it's part of my personality, but you know, I think it helps to keep things light because the subject matter sometimes is so intense. And, you know, in many of these things, there isn't a right and wrong answer. In fact, in so many things in life, there's not a right or wrong answer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people will say things like, well, how do you know how many times is the right amount of time? You know, there's no answer for that.
Right, yeah.
You know, somebody was asking me, well, you know, I'm having fertility treatment. Like, you know, how many times should I give the fertility treatment? You know, it's like, well, you know, that's a very personal thing.
Right, yeah.
You know, and in this person's particular case, you know, I think they had given their, it took them 7 tries to get a certain professional certification. And I thought, well, if you gave that 7 tries, I would certainly give the fertility 7 tries. Are you with me?
Yeah. Now, were you given K2 7 tries, do you think? Were you just?
Well, now see, that's interesting because it's really hard to go back. So I said I don't think I would have given it a 4th try. And when I said that to somebody today, they said, oh no, you definitely would have.
I think you would have. I believe.
Yeah. So here I am, like trying to deny a 4th try, and people are like, no way, you totally would have. And I can see I could see that allure would have been there as long as it was undone. Right.
Yeah. So tell me, I know that you recently, I think it was last year during the pandemic, you went down to the Mariana Trench, right? So
Yeah.
you're not finished, are you, with your adventure?
You know, I was really thankful and grateful to be able to do that because 1, it was very unusual. 2, it was almost impossible to do during COVID-19.
Mm.
And
so she's been to the highest and lowest point on Earth. So
yeah, and the lowest point is actually deeper than Everest is tall.
Oh my gosh.
If you can imagine, you could take that mountain, turn it upside down, and you could still go 2 miles more.
So how many miles exactly is it that you went down?
They're almost 36,000 feet deep.
Okay.
So it took 4 hours in a submersible to go to the bottom, 3 hours across to determine whether it was flat like a billiard table or whether there were seamounts or, you know, whether it sloped down or up. And we had wanted to take samples, you know, with an electronic arm, remote arm of rocks and things like that. The pincher didn't quite work, but that's okay.
Wow.
Something will always go wrong. You always have to plan for that. And 4 hours back up. So it was like one long summit.
Wow.
And 8 tons of pressure, 16,000 pounds per square inch. So, and there were only, prior to that dive, 3 manned missions that had made it to that place. So it was historic. It was unbelievable to be able to do it during the pandemic, because you might have remembered reading about USS Theodore Roosevelt and Crozier, who put the alarm up. Those guys had COVID on the ship. They were in the Pacific Ocean. It started with 3 sailors. It turned to 103 days.
But you weren't near that ship, were you? Or you?
Well, we had to pass through Guam
Okay.
to get to our ship. And the minute those sailors went to Guam and they turned Guam into a COVID, facility, a hospital, they didn't want anybody passing through. So it was really, in fact, I have, I'd like to say in times of crisis, sometimes you can get things done and sometimes things come to a standstill. But also in crisis, sometimes people don't know what to do. And therefore you can slightly squeeze by because there's uncertainty.
Right.
So in this case, President Trump had put a president's proclamation. He said only essential travel, but nobody knew what that meant.
Right.
So we were fortunate to be able to, because we were doing scientific studies, to be able to say it was essential.
So tell me, we're about out of time, so I want to know what are you doing next? What can we? I mean, you got the book and you're talking about your book, but do you have an adventure planned, some kind of adventure ahead?
It's so I can answer that in 2 ways. One is I always like to keep an open mind, because if you don't keep an open mind, you will miss things when they come. So I don't like to say I will only do this, right? Because then the universe doesn't keep you open for this, and this as they come. I have so many interests that I would, if somebody wanted to go find Shackleton's ship, I think the story of endurance is amazing. I would go to Antarctica in a heartbeat.
Wow. And his granddaughter.
I absolutely do. I think that's amazing. And the 100th anniversary of her grandfather's death is February next year.
Oh, wow.
So it would be great to be able to tell a new generation that story.
Yes.
Because he was phenomenal, not for meeting his goal and getting where he wanted to go, but for saving his men.
Yes, his leadership is
leadership, and it's a perfect COVID story. He would be a great leader in times of COVID, because you had to put people first.
Right.
So things like that I think are very interesting, but it's almost like you need somebody who would want to do that, to go to Antarctica and find a ship that's, $6 million.
Right, yeah.
Off the top of my head, right? It's not cheap. So you need a film crew or somebody who wanted to do it. Something like space is interesting to add it to something like the oceans, the poles, the mountains, but space is complex.
Right.
What does it mean? Are you talking about the Kármán line, the separation of outer space versus the Earth's atmosphere? Are you talking about going to the moon? Are you talking about a lunar mission? What does space mean?
Yeah.
So space means, for me, at a minimum, getting out of Earth's orbit, and into outer space.
Right.
And that's just my minimum requirement. I would like to just be out of our atmosphere. So that's all I have to do.
A friend who's an astronaut. She's done a talk with us, so maybe someday you'll meet and you can talk about space adventures and isolation, because I think that's part of it, is the isolation.
Absolutely.
Aren't they looking for people to go to Mars?
I would not go to Mars. I would not go to Mars. Mars is one way.
Yeah.
You cannot survive on Mars, despite their attempts to want to colonize it. That would be people one way, one group, will never come back. You would deteriorate and never be able to survive.
So you're adventurous, but you're not crazy. That's what you're saying.
Well, I don't really see the point. You can't survive there.
Yeah.
It's like surviving in an asbestos suit if the world like blows up in some toxic like chemical warfare or something. I just don't see the point. It's, I mean, maybe from a, you know, if you were really scientifically minded and said, hey, that's interesting. Buzz Aldrin's really keen on it and he's scientifically minded, but it's a lot of money to prove what and why.
Yeah.
I just think they're, even NASA and how much money they spent to map Moon and Mars, we don't know what the bottom of 85% of Earth's oceans look like. And, you know, maybe that would have proven some benefit to humankind in some way that we don't know about yet. The oceans absorb 25% of our carbon dioxide. We were having a climate crisis.
Right.
You know, I don't know. I just put the question out there without really any judgment.
Well, we can't wait. We'll stay tuned to see what you do next.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think they're all exciting options. You know, there was a Japanese billionaire that opened up a lottery called Dear Moon, and he invited 8 people. 1 million people applied. So as he sorts through there, maybe he'll find me.
Oh, so you're in the application. You're in the
I did apply.
Oh, good. Can we rally for you and support you in this? Does he take?
Yeah, you know, he
vote on them?
Well, you know, he's got 1 million applicants, but he was very sweet in his criteria. He just wanted, you know, people who would come back and share their journey with other people. That was his criteria for applicants.
Perfect for that. Guys, everybody watching, you're going to be going to the moon. I have this feeling.
Well, you know, I'm sure he could have had 1 million reporters and, you know, really highly qualified people to do that too, you know.
Well, he should read the book, and you should too. Everybody listening should too. Really, it's so well done. It's a great book. I'm impressed with your writing skills too, and tying back your background and everything together with your adventure stories and humor and life lessons, all of it. It's all there. So I want to thank you so much, Vanessa. We're out of time, and I thank everybody who came with us, and Lisa is hoping you win the space lottery too.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, nice to see you in person. Thank you guys. Thanks for hosting tonight.
We'll stay tuned and try to follow you through your adventures.
Thank you. That sounds wonderful. Nice to meet everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.